Welcome to this episode of Eureka, and we are going to have a very engaging conversation with Professor S.V. Easwaran, Regional Center for Biotechnology in Faridabad, an institution under Department of Biotechnology which is engaged in frontier areas of research connected with biotechnology where multiple disciplines are merging together to find applications. We are going to have a very interesting conversation with him. Keep watching Eureka. Before that, we'll take a short look at his brief profile and we'll continue the conversation.
Cataract is responsible for 60% cases of blindness among human beings worldwide. Most of us think that cataract can be removed only through surgery, but the fact is that it can be delayed and reversed. Dr. S.V. Easwaran, who is currently a professor at Regional Center for Biotechnology, Faridabad, has researched lanosterol synthase that delays and reverses cataract in rabbits and dogs. Now, scientists are asking whether this result can be extended to human beings. Dr. Easwaran has served as the head of chemistry department and dean at St. Stephen's College, University of Delhi, and taught for 44 years. He has also served as principal at Deshbandhu College, University of Delhi for 2 years. Dr. Easwaran did his PhD from Delhi University and his postdoctorate from Max Planck Institute for Biochemistry at Munich. Dr. Easwaran studied the cross-linking of acrystallin, the transparent protein of the human eye lens, and is especially looking for collaborative work on studies on protein complexes. His research theme was the discovery of new molecule Visvamine that was named after the late Professor M.A. Viswamitra from IIC Bangalore and a famous X-ray crystallographer. Dr. Easwaran has received many awards and recognitions. Noted among them is Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam Lifetime Achievement Award 2016, INSA Teachers Award 2013. He has published over 70 papers and has been granted many patents.
Thank you, sir, being with us. It's a wonderful opportunity. It's really very interesting to read about you before coming to this interview. I looked at your work. Let me start with this question. One of the things that you have been very famous for is the new molecule that you found called Visvamine. We all know about molecules like, for example, carbon dioxide made out of 1 carbon and 2 oxygen make out of 3 atoms. If you're talking about methane, there are about 5 atoms. Your Visvamine has something like about 96 to 100 atoms. It's a huge one. Maybe molecular weight is close to about 500 plus?
534. We can determine it up to the 4th decimal place.
Good. Can you tell us how did you come to this molecule and what is so special about this?
I'm happy to be here in your show called Eureka. The fact is that I was working on some green reagents, as they are called today, aromatic azides, which contain up to 3 nitrogen atoms called the azide group, covalently bound to an aromatic ring. These are called green reagents because when they are exposed to light or when they are heated, nitrogen is lost and nitrogen does not do any harm to the environment. When we took one such aromatic azide, for which I had made many trips abroad to make the starting material, I had named it as azido-meta-hemipinate, a common name for the molecule, the starting material. When we thermalized or heated it at 130 degrees, I saw there was a new molecule whose spectra which we recorded were most unusual. Okay. For example, its proton magnetic resonance immediately told me this is a new molecule. It took me many years to name the molecule after publication as Visvamine. This aromatic azide on thermolysis should and did yield, which we do not see, but we presume, a singlet nitrine. And all students of chemistry, my main subject which I worked on all my life and taught at St. Stephen's College for nearly 44 plus years, should lead to a triplet nitrine which should be more stable. But in our case, it was very clear from the spectrum before me on the table that the singlet nitrene had not converted itself into the more stable triplet state.
So it's like in a normal chemical reaction, like for example, as I grow older, you would expect my hair to become whiter and whiter and whiter. But here you are seeing that suddenly instead of becoming white, it's turning back to black. That kind of some kind of amazement.
Not that exactly. We normally expect that a more unstable species, these are transients. Transients are some things which are formed for a short while. Many years later, the lifespan of one such transient in such a reaction was measured for me in the Ohio State University. This is published in the Journal of Physical Chemistry 2012, jointly by us. Can you believe it? We call it the long-lived transient, long-lived species. Can you believe it? What is the lifespan of this long-lived species? 700 picoseconds.
700 picoseconds. And 1 picosecond is...
10 raised to the minus 12 seconds.
Yeah, it's about 1 in 10,000 crore part.
But why do we call it long-lived species? Because it did not flip to the more stable, less energetic species. It went on in the absence of any other reagent to form ring-expanded products through an intermediate which turned out to be more stable than the nitrene. This is taught in postgraduate and undergraduate classes in chemistry as carbene. A nitrene getting converted into a carbene is not unknown, is very rare. Only few examples are known. This is called the Crowe-Wentrup pathway. Professor Wentrup is even today working as the editor of Australian Journal of Chemistry. But what is fascinating is, because it is long-lived and with a lifespan of 700 picoseconds, the nitrene is able to get converted into the carbene, and we have formed and identified products both based on the nitrene and the carbene. This is published in a paper in Journal of Organic Chemistry in 2012 in the USA and in Tetrahedron 2017 very recently. But these are all supported today. As I mentioned earlier, if you go to a rock garden, you might go and enter at a flat place, then you climb a small rock, come down, and then there is a small pahadi kind of a thing, then you come down and you come down to a valley. Chemical reactions occur in the same manner.
They take some kind of a path.
And the
it's not
like
instantaneously they change from one to another.
Not at all.
There is an in-between pathways.
Not only that, they invariably go through points in the reaction sequence which are high energy points called as transition states or intermediates, which are something like the small valley, but the final product is invariably much lower in energy. I am happy to say in all my papers in the last few years, theoretical chemistry, computational chemistry has contributed where we can calculate the exact energy content of each one of these points on the pathways. And the computational chemistry using new software, both with Ohio and with the Bhavnagar CSIR laboratory, show that what we have claimed, that the nitrene initially formed does not flip to the more stable triplet state. Instead, it flips to a carbene, and products both from the carbene and the nitrene are identified in my papers. This is unusual, and if I may say so, I do not think there are any reports from our country on such compounds and their formation.
Two questions about
Yes.
this. One question is, when did you first discover this molecule? Number one. Number two, why did you name it as Vishwamai?
The first hints of this molecule came to me as early as, shall I say, 1986-87.
Okay.
We actually solved the structure of this problem only with the help of the late Professor M.A. Vishwamitra, who was a professor of physics, student of the Nobel laureate Dorothy Crawford Hodgkin. She used to say, Vishwamitra has green fingers. He will crystallize anything. He crystallized my molecule as a single crystal, and he was able to solve the X-ray diffraction structure, which actually solved the structure. We published it together in 1996 in the Journal of Heterocyclic Chemistry. But his name was Professor M.A. Vishwamitra. So I named it like benzene, toluene, xylene as Vishwamine because our molecule also contains many double bonds.
Okay, okay.
But there is a second meaning. Can we not hear of the word in India, Vishwamayim, one which is present everywhere? Aren't atoms and molecules are present everywhere around us, in us and around us? So the meanings were the name of Professor Vishwamitra being used and also a second meaning that such materials are around us everywhere.
So this was very, very interesting. It's a very interesting conversation. Keep watching Rekha. We're going to take a short break, but after the break, we are going to discuss about how cashew nut shell, working with cashew nut shell is given him new pathways using chemistry. We're going to discuss after the break. Keep watching Rekha. Welcome back to Eureka. We are having a very wonderful conversation with Professor S.V. Easwaran with the Regional Center for Biotechnology in Faridabad, an institution under Department of Biotechnology, and he is a very well-known chemist. You have worked on cashew nut shell. Cashew nut is very common in India. We consume a lot. We produce a lot. Although it's not our native species, but today we are one of the topmost cultivators. And one of your work is related to using cashew nut shell and taking extract from that and then using it profitably. What is this magic?
A very interesting study based on cashew nut shell liquid, abbreviated CNSL, cashew nut shell liquid.
Okay.
It's a low-cost phenolic, resin which is available in India, especially in southern India, in the states of Karnataka, Tamil Nadu and parts of Kerala. Cashew nut, what we call otherwise a kaju, is exported by India even today and consumed within the country also substantially. I am talking about
the shell.
The liquid from the shell, which is very harmful, very corrosive. If you are not careful, it will blind you. I actually polymerized this particular liquid, which is a phenolic, contains a phenol called by the name cardinol, which was given to me by an industrialist from the Marudamalai estate in Tamil Nadu, in Chennai, near Chennai. I did this work in Tumba, in the laboratories in Tumba. The polymer is a very regular polymer with a very good polydispersivity value. Even today, after many years, that polymer is stable. I also prepared light active substances which are instantaneously reactive to light, blended the two in a suitable solvent. Such a material is called a photoresist. That means it resists the action of light and its molecular weight increases tremendously on exposure to light. Believe me,
instead of usually when I put a color cloth outside in the sun, the color fades because basically the molecular dissociates.
Yes.
Here it is a reverse action.
The reactive species which I referred to in our previous talk actually bends and blinds and blends into the polymer and cross-links the polymer, increasing its molecular weight. Therefore, from a soluble species, it becomes insoluble. And this happens within milliseconds. So, we use this successfully to print microelectronic circuits at 5 microns, which is 1/14th of the human hair, on silicon wafers. Once you have printed this circuit, what is called photomicrolithography, light-dependent writing at the micron level, drawings, we could make any gadget for this. And we have already obtained in 2010 an Indian patent, which I have assigned to the DRDO, Defense Research Development Organization, for printing microelectronic circuits. But the same photoresist and similar materials could also be used for making many other gadgets and processes like solar cells, or for that matter, you could study many other physical phenomena use in this. So the use of cashew nut shell liquid to print microelectronic circuits has given me immense joy.
Okay.
Since the processes are available, I'd be so happy if this experiment, even if it's not a technology yet, is repeated all over the country by our students, both undergraduate, postgraduate students, so that they understand the principles of how the microelectronics industry, which is the photoresists are about $10 billion US per year consumption worldwide.
So
India
we can
does
have
not
a
make
very,
it.
very interesting.
Certainly.
Yeah. Now coming to another point about your research work is about cataract. I mean, though you are not from a medical field in that sense,
Yes.
you think chemistry can help. Can you explain it?
Very simple. Cataract is responsible for 60% blindness in human beings worldwide. How does it originate? Cataractogenesis.
How does the cataract form?
How does it start? How does it initiate? Let us understand that the human eye lens contains a protein extremely well studied in India by one of our very senior professors, Dr. D. Balasubramanian.
Yeah.
It's called alpha A crystallin. This protein in the human eye lens, along with other proteins, this is 100% water soluble.
Yeah.
And it is heat stable. So imagine you are taking a bath and your lens, eye lens being washed off, does not happen, it's beautifully sealed. Or you are somebody working in the kitchen and the heat melts. No, it doesn't happen, it's heat stable. But the most important property of this protein, it's 100% transparent.
Absolutely transparent.
If it is not, you know how much difficulty we will have reading a book or walking around.
I mean, actually, if you take a pouch of water and then try to look through it, though water is transparent, it is not 100% transparent, so you can see that things are not very clear. But whereas our eye lens is really clear.
This is God's gift, your mother's gift for that matter. 100% transparent, but under certain conditions.
Okay.
For example, unwanted oxidation in the human eye lens. Can you believe it? In some disease states leading to cataract, hydrogen peroxide, I am not alarming you, hydrogen peroxide is produced in the human eye lens.
It's highly corrosive.
Highly corrosive. And it oxidizes one or two of the amino acids in the primary structure of alpha A crystallin. There begins the
cataract.
transparent protein now becomes somewhat translucent, and if this process is not stopped, it becomes opaque and the person becomes blind.
Okay. This is the way the chemical change actually makes cataract in our eye. Okay.
This is the origin.
Archie.
Can we prevent it?
That is the question.
I want to cite a work not from India, but from China, published in the most well-known journal called Nature in 2015. The Chinese asked the question, can cataract be delayed or reversed? They have studied a family in which the first generation, the second generation, the third generations are safe.
Okay.
But in the fourth generation, 3 offsprings, 3 children are blind. And they have analyzed.
Very, very, very interesting. We'll take a very short break, but we are going to discuss what happens after. Can we find a cure? If we know what causes it, can we somehow prevent it? Or can we take some action whereby we can ensure that the cataract doesn't set in? This we are going to discuss after the break. Keep watching Eureka. We'll take a very short break and come back to you again. Welcome back to Eureka. We are having a very wonderful conversation with Professor S.V. Easwaran of Regional Center for Biotechnology, an institution under Department of Biotechnology. Before the break, we were talking about cataract and how does the cataract origins. Our eye lens is nothing but a kind of a protein. When that protein gets degraded due to certain chemical action, that's how the cataract begins. That's what he was explaining. We'll continue with this. So we understand that maybe because of some kind of oxidization, the cataract origins. What happens afterwards?
That means it's not only cataract. We want to also look at blindness in human beings and other animals in this context. I like to cite a very interesting paper published from China
Okay.
in the very respected, highly reputed journal called Nature in 2015. Chinese scientists working in China, in collaboration with Chinese scientists in the United States, have shown us that in a given family, the first generation, the second generation, the third generation are apparently safe.
Okay.
But there is a consanguineous marriage somewhere in the family, that means marriage between cousins. In the fourth generation,
There is a problem.
3 of the children are blind.
Okay.
So they ask the question, what is the reason for this blindness in the fourth generation? They analyzed the proteins that are present in the patients and they found one mutation, one change in an amino acid in position 588. A glycine becoming a serine amino acid.
It's
Just
like a
one
spelling
change.
mistake.
Spelling mistake.
Fine.
But the spelling mistake is traced to the early primary school teaching, for example, the genes which are dictating this.
Okay.
And there is a gene which is highly conserved, there is a one base mutation, one base change, and therefore the codon responsible for this amino acid change has been detected.
Okay.
But interestingly, it doesn't stay with the human species alone, because this particular gene is highly conserved and is common to human beings,
So in
dogs
evolution,
and rabbits.
in evolution, it's a gene that has come from other.
No, and it's conserved across the species, human beings, dogs and rabbits. They took dogs with, and rabbits with cataract
Okay.
and blindness, and they treated with the enzyme which is responsible for the conversion of the gene to the amino acid.
Okay.
That is called lanosterol synthase. Lanosterol synthase produces a precursor of cholesterol.
Okay.
It's called lanosterol, a precursor of cholesterol.
Okay.
And lanosterol was applied to the eyes of dogs and rabbits. Can you believe it? Cataract just disappeared.
Fine.
This is a path-breaking research from China. I must appreciate this. The question that remains to be answered is, can this be extended to human beings?
Okay. So that's a quest that you are involved in right now.
Very much. How do these proteins interact with each other? Can alpha-A crystalline dimerize, oligomerize, aggregate, join with other protein fragments?
Although today cataract operation is a very, very simple one, it's a very simple procedure, but if we can retain our own lens, nothing like it.
Nothing like it. Not only
that's
that, there are problems. Sometimes it is an old age patient and partial vision. The doctors say the cataract has not matured. Come after 3 months. In these 3 months, sometimes an older person has a fall or something, gets
That is a
injured
problem.
or gets into a road accident or something. So in all cases, it's not always possible to do cataract
Very, very,
operations.
very interesting area that you are working, and we hope that your work and your colleagues' work put together will bring in result. We talked about cataract and how chemistry and chemical work can, maybe restore our lens. That's a very interesting stuff. Another question I want to ask, which is kind of, let's say, funny. When you are young, your mom tells you that eat spinach, palak. And we have this cartoon show, Popeye the Sailor Man, spinach is so much revered. But you have written an article which says that grasshoppers don't eat spinach. What is it? Why?
The title of the article is, Why Does the Grasshopper Not Eat Spinach?
Okay.
The fact is that the grasshopper knows over evolutionary times that if it ate spinach, it may get multiple heads.
Like Ravana.
Oh yeah.
Oh God.
But what is more interesting is that not only does it know, it keeps away from spinach. Spinach contains the insect, please remember, I am not saying plant, insect molting hormones in huge concentrations on the leaf, the spinach leaf. But it does not do any harm to the insect. but the insect, the grasshopper comes to eat, it knows this spinach leaves has insect molting hormones in huge concentrations which do harm to its biology and
But
its
it doesn't
existence.
hurt humans?
It doesn't. In fact, surprisingly, the same plant is in fact, though there's a wrong report that it contains huge amount of iron, but it is certainly very helpful even to keep, say for example, diabetes away. Many people believe. People think it contains anabolic steroids, it contains plant steroids, which are beneficial to human beings.
Okay, very, very, very interesting. Let me ask you this last question because we are running out of time. But as a chemist and a person who has been working in chemistry for more than 4 decades, this I should certainly ask you. Today, you walk around the road and ask anybody, you carry a bottle of water, good water, you tell them oh, this is chemical. And we all know water is nothing but chemical, H2O. You tell them this is chemical. The first reaction of them is going to be that, oh no, I won't drink this. Chemistry, chemical is today associated with negativity. As a person who is working in chemistry for more than 4 decades, what's your take on this? Should we fear chemistry?
Good question. Chemistry has a bad press. Some other subjects have a good press. I think somehow chemists have been at the receiving end. Don't we know all the known drugs, especially in the Western system of medicine, allopathic medicine, are all synthesized by chemists. You mentioned about water. In my childhood, if I traveled from North India to South India, I had to fill up water in my surai, Mattika surai, and I was not sure about the nature of the water. Today we are getting very good quality in water throughout the country at a certain price. But I want to take this discussion to a different height. Should there be water, let's imagine, and it's already in literature, where small amounts of water soluble nanocarbon materials for which 2 Nobel Prizes have been given already, but no commercial use has been found, 0.0002 milligrams per 100 ml, if that water spiked with this substance with no toxicity cures Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease for that matter, and this is already freely available in Ukraine with the approval of the Ukraine Health Ministry, that water would be almost like an elixir or an amrit. I don't think we should give so much of bad press to chemistry, which gives us so much of nutrition, so much of drugs which are used by doctors. The other day I was hearing about the fact that there are drugs like if there is a certain patient who has just had an heart attack, we had to import the chemical. Today we have it made in India. Do we have that good press for chemistry? I hope that would happen.
That's a very important question, and this is a point where we may have to end this conversation for want of time. We had a very wonderful discussion on chemistry, how interesting chemical work can lead to not only discovery of very interesting aspects like Vishwamine, but also useful products like maybe, for example, cure to cataract. Keep watching Eureka. We'll come back with very interesting conversation with another Indian scientist next week, same time. Keep watching Eureka.